I was lying in a hospital bed, barely able to lift my head, when my husband handed me a pen and said, "Just sign here, babe. It's for the insurance update." The paper was face down on a clipboard. My vision was blurry from the medication. I remember my hand shaking as I reached for the pen. What I didn't know was that signature would later show up on a $500,000 life insurance policy I never applied for. 6 months later, I'd find my husband's text to another woman, just waiting for things to clear up. Then we're Florida-bound. That's when I understood I wasn't supposed to recover from this illness. My name is Serena. I'm 34 years old, and I teach history at a high school in Edison, New Jersey. 8 years ago, I married David Cooper, a financial advisor at a mid-sized investment firm in Manhattan. We met at a friend's wedding. Everyone said we made a beautiful couple. My parents adored him. His career seemed solid. We bought a 3-bedroom colonial in a nice neighborhood and took vacations to the Caribbean. To the outside world, we had it all figured out. But let me tell you how it really was. The first time I noticed something off was about 2 years into our marriage. I found a credit card statement in David's car, an account I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, he brushed it off. "Business expenses," he said. "Separate account for client entertainment." Totally normal in my industry. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was the financial expert. I taught teenagers about the Civil War. What did I know about investment accounts and business credit? Looking back now, I see how carefully he managed my ignorance. He always handled our finances, paid the bills online, filed the taxes, told me our money was working for us in various accounts. I had access to our joint checking, but he made it seem like everything else was too complicated to explain. "Trust me," he'd say. "This is what I do for a living." I should have pushed harder, should have asked more questions. But I was busy with work, and our life seemed comfortable enough. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. At least, that's what I thought. 3 months ago, everything changed. I was in the middle of teaching a lesson on Reconstruction when the room started spinning. One of my students, Dale, a kid who usually never paid attention, jumped up and caught me before I hit the floor. The next thing I remember is waking up in an ambulance, paramedics asking me questions I couldn't quite process. The ER doctor ran a battery of tests. My white blood cell count was abnormal. My liver enzymes were elevated. They admitted me for observation, and over the next 3 days, specialists came and went. Finally, a rheumatologist gave me the diagnosis: systemic lupus erythematosus, an autoimmune disorder where my body was essentially attacking itself. "It's serious," Dr. Patel explained, "but very treatable. You'll need medication, regular monitoring, and significant rest for the next several months." The good news is that most people with lupus live normal, full lives with proper management. I was terrified, relieved it wasn't cancer, but terrified of what this meant for my life, my career, my future. David was there when I got the diagnosis. He held my hand, kissed my forehead, said all the right things. "We'll get through this together. Whatever you need, I'm here." For the first few weeks after I came home, he seemed like the perfect husband. He took time off work to drive me to appointments, picked up my prescriptions, made sure I took my medications on schedule, brought me soup and tea, asked how I was feeling every morning. But there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. A distance. Like he was going through the motions, but his mind was somewhere else. One afternoon, about a month into my recovery, David came home with a manila folder. "Hey, so I talked to HR about our insurance," he said casually. "They're updating some policies, and we need to make sure everything's current, especially now with your condition." He spread several documents across the kitchen table. "Just need your signature on a few forms. Updates to your beneficiary information, medical directives, that kind of thing. Standard stuff when you have a new diagnosis." I was exhausted. The medication made me foggy. I remember looking at the papers, official-looking documents with small print and signature lines highlighted in yellow. What exactly am I signing? I asked. Just updating who makes medical decisions if you're ever unable to, and making sure I'm listed properly on all your policies. The insurance company requires it. He handed me a pen. It's really just formality. Something fell off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. My head hurt. I was so tired. And David was my husband, the person who was supposed to protect me.
So I signed
3 different documents. Didn't read them carefully. Didn't ask for copies. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was not noticing how much time David started spending on his phone. Late-night texts he'd quickly hide when I walked into the room. Calls he'd take in the garage or outside. When I asked who he was talking to, it was always work or clients. I was too sick to press the issue. 2 months into my recovery, I started feeling worse instead of better. The fatigue was crushing. I'd sleep 12 hours and wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My head felt cloudy, disconnected. Dr. Patel adjusted my medications, but nothing seemed to help. Sometimes lupus flares are unpredictable, she told me. We'll keep monitoring you closely. David seemed increasingly stressed. Snapped at me over small things. Complained about money more frequently. These medical bills are piling up, he'd say. Insurance doesn't cover everything. We're going to have to make some changes. I felt guilty. Like my illness was a burden he hadn't signed up for. I tried to go back to work part-time, but I could barely make it through a full day. The school gave me short-term disability leave. David said we'd be fine, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, hear it in his voice. Then 3 weeks ago, everything started to unravel. I was going through the mail, something I rarely did since David usually handled it, and found an envelope from an insurance company I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. It was a statement for a life insurance policy. The insured party was listed as Serena Cooper. The coverage amount, $500,000. The beneficiary, David Cooper. I stared at the paper, trying to make sense of it. We had life insurance through our jobs. Small policies, maybe $50,000 each. But this was different. This was a private policy. And I had no memory of applying for it. My hands started shaking. I searched through the rest of the mail David had stacked on his desk. Found 3 more envelopes. Credit card statements for accounts I'd never opened. Medical billing notices for appointments I'd never attended. A letter from a bank about a personal loan application. All in my name. All with signatures that looked like mine, but somehow weren't quite right. I felt the room tilting again. But this time it wasn't from the lupus. This was pure adrenaline and fear. I grabbed my laptop and started searching. Checked my credit report. Found 4 new accounts opened in the past 6 months. Total debt, $87,000. I hadn't opened any of them. When David came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with all the documents spread out in front of me. He saw them before he saw me. I watched his face cycle through emotions, surprise, then calculation, then something that looked almost like resignation. We need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He set down his briefcase slowly. Serena, I can explain. You took out a life insurance policy on me? Without telling me? It's not what you think. Then what is it, David? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been opening accounts in my name, forging my signature, and taking out $500,000 in life insurance on your sick wife. He ran his hand through his hair. That gesture I used to find endearing now looked like a tell. The policy was just a precaution. With your condition, I wanted to make sure we were protected. Protected from what? Me dying? That's not, look, you don't understand how expensive this has all been. Your treatments, the medications, everything. I was trying to be responsible. By forging my signature? I didn't forge anything. You signed those papers. Remember? At the kitchen table. My stomach dropped. The insurance updates. The forms he'd given me when I was barely coherent for medication. You lied to me about what I was signing. I simplified it. You were overwhelmed. Don't. I stood up, gripping the table for support. Don't you dare make this about me being too sick to understand. What else have you done? He didn't answer. Just looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before.
Cold.
Calculating. Like he was running numbers in his head. That's when I knew. This wasn't about protecting us. This was about protecting himself. That night, I didn't sleep.
Couldn't.
I lay in bed next to a man I suddenly didn't recognize, running through everything in my mind. The credit cards, the insurance policy, the way he'd been acting, the phone calls he wouldn't explain. Around 3 a.m., I heard him get up. Thought he was going to the bathroom, but he was gone too long. I crept downstairs and found him in his home office, door closed. Through the crack, I could see the glow of his computer screen. Heard him typing. I went back upstairs before he caught me, but sleep was impossible. At dawn, as soon as I heard him leave for the gym, a new habit he'd picked up recently, I went to his office. His computer was password protected, but I knew David. He used the same password for everything. Our wedding date. I logged in and started searching. What I found made my blood run cold. Email exchanges with someone named Melissa. Hundreds of them, going back months. Casual at first, then increasingly intimate. And then I found this message, sent 2 weeks ago. Can't wait to start fresh in Florida. Just need to wait a bit longer for things to clear up here. Then we're free. Her response, how much longer? I miss you. His reply, not long now. She's getting worse. Doctor says these autoimmune things can be unpredictable. Could be weeks, could be months. But one way or another, this'll be over soon. I read it 3 times. Each time, the word seemed more impossible, more monstrous. This'll be over soon. He wasn't talking about my recovery.
He was talking about my death.
And he was counting on it. I backed away from the computer, like it might bite me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. But there was one thought that kept pushing to the surface, making my skin crawl. I'd been getting sicker instead of better. Much sicker. Despite the medications. Despite following every instruction from my doctor. What if it wasn't the lupus making me worse? What if it was someone else? I thought about the meals David prepared for me. The pills he handed me at bedtime. Here, take these. They'll help you sleep. The way he always watched to make sure I swallowed them. The crushing exhaustion that came afterward. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. Stared at myself in the mirror. I looked terrible, pale, hollow-eyed, thinner than I'd been in years. Was this all the lupus? Or had my own husband been slowly poisoning me? I needed help. Needed someone I could trust. My parents lived in Florida now, too far away. Most of our friends were couple friends, people who knew us as a unit. They'd never believe this. But there was one person who would. My brother, James. Detective James Wilson, with the Newark Police Department. We'd always been close, even after he moved an hour away for work. He'd never particularly liked David. Called him slick and too smooth. I'd always defended my husband. Now I wished I'd listened. I grabbed my phone and texted James. Need to see you. Urgent. Can't talk here. His response came within minutes. What's wrong? Everything. Can you come get me? On my way. 20 minutes. I threw some clothes in a bag. Grabbed my laptop, my documents, anything I might need. When I heard David's car in the driveway, I was sitting on the couch, trying to look normal. Trying not to let him see the terror that was crawling up my spine. Morning, he said, way too cheerful. How are you feeling?
Tired, I said.
Which was true. James is picking me up in a bit. We're going to have lunch. Something flickered across David's face.
Oh.
I thought we could spend the day together. I took off work. I already made plans, I said, keeping my voice casual. I'll be back this evening. He didn't like it. I could tell. But he couldn't exactly forbid me from seeing my own brother. Okay, he said slowly. Well, make sure you take your medication before you go. He handed me my pill case. The morning dose. I looked at the pills, the ones Dr. Patel prescribed, plus 2 others. Small blue tablets David had added weeks ago. Extra supplements, he'd said, to help with the fatigue. I'd been taking them without question.
Now I felt sick looking at them.
I already took them. I lied. Earlier, when I woke up. His eyes narrowed slightly. You sure? I didn't see the case moved. I'm sure, David. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then James's car pulled into the driveway, and the spell broke. Have fun, David said. But his voice had an edge to it I'd never heard before. I walked out of that house knowing I might never come back. In James's car, I broke down. Showed him everything, the emails, the insurance policy, the credit accounts, the forged signatures. Told him about my suspicions regarding the medication. My brother's face went through a series of transformations.
Shock.
Rage. And then something harder. Detective mode. We need to document all of this, he said. And we need to get you checked out. If he's been drugging you, we need proof. We drove straight to the hospital. Not my regular one. James insisted we go somewhere David wouldn't think to look. The ER doctor listened to my story with increasing concern. Drew blood samples. Ran a tox screen. The results would take a few days, but she admitted me for observation. If someone's been tampering with your medication, your body needs time to clear it out, she explained. We'll monitor you closely. James stayed with me. Called his captain. Explained the situation. By that evening, I had 2 detectives in my hospital room taking my statement. Taking copies of everything I'd found. This is serious, Detective Brennan said. Insurance fraud, identity theft, possible attempted murder. We need to move carefully, build a solid case. But I want you to know, we believe you, and we're going to handle this. The next few days were surreal. I stayed at James's apartment in Newark, under the protection of police surveillance. The tox screen came back positive for several substances I'd never been prescribed, benzodiazepines in doses high enough to cause the crushing fatigue I'd been experiencing. Anti-nausea medication that, in high doses, actually causes severe nausea. Small amounts of medication that would mimic and exacerbate my lupus symptoms. Dr. Patel was horrified when the police contacted her. This explains why you weren't responding to treatment, she said during a phone call. Your husband was essentially making you sicker while I was trying to help you get better. David, meanwhile, was spiraling. He called my phone 50 times the first day. Left voicemails that started concerned, then angry, then desperate. Serena, where are you? Why won't you talk to me? Your brother's putting crazy ideas in your head.
Come home.
We need to talk about this. But I wasn't coming home. I was working with a lawyer James recommended, a sharp woman named Catherine who specialized in cases like mine. We filed for an emergency restraining order. Froze all joint accounts. Filed police reports for identity theft, forgery, and insurance fraud. And then we made copies of everything and sent it to the FBI. Because forging signatures on federal insurance documents? That's a federal crime. The dominoes started falling fast. The FBI opened an investigation. David's employer was notified. His assets were frozen pending investigation. And when police executed a search warrant on our house, they found a journal hidden in his office. A journal where he'd been documenting his plan. Dosages of medication. Timelines. Notes about how long it would take for an autoimmune disease to become terminal if left untreated. Calculations about insurance payouts and Florida real estate prices. Reading that journal was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Seeing my own death planned out in my husband's handwriting. The cold, clinical way he'd approached it. Like I was a problem to be solved. An obstacle between him and the life he wanted with Melissa. The worst part? He almost got away with it. If I'd been just a little sicker, a little less suspicious, I might not have caught on in time. I might have signed more papers, taken more pills, Until one day I just didn't wake up. And everyone would have said, such a tragedy. So young. That lupus just got worse so fast. David was arrested at his office. James sent me the video, office building security footage showing FBI agents walking him out in handcuffs while his coworkers watched. His face was white, eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape route that didn't exist. His lawyer tried to make a deal, claimed David had made poor decisions, but never intended to hurt me, that the journal was just thoughts and the medication mix-up was accidental. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the fraudulent insurance policy, the credit accounts opened in my name with debt he'd been accumulating for risky investments that had failed, the texts to Melissa, the medication tampering, the journal. And there was one more piece of evidence that sealed his fate: our home security cameras. The ones David had installed for our protection. He didn't realize they backed up to the cloud. Didn't know I'd found the password. The footage showed him, late at night, crushing pills and mixing them into my food. Showed him switching out my prescription bottles. Showed him researching symptoms of lupus complications on his computer. All time-stamped. All documented. When Catherine presented this in court, I watched David's lawyer physically slump in his chair. There was no defense. No way to spin this. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 days. Talked about our marriage, the diagnosis, my suspicions. Read excerpts from his journal in open court. Watched him refuse to meet my eyes. Melissa was there too. Called as a witness. She claimed she didn't know he was still married. Said he told her his wife had died from complications of lupus. When the prosecutor showed her the timeline, dates David was texting her while I was lying in a hospital bed, she started crying. Realized she'd been dating a man who was actively trying to take his wife's life. The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Insurance fraud. Identity theft. Attempted murder. Forgery of federal documents. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. Mr. Cooper, you tried to destroy your wife's life for financial gain. The only reason Serena Wilson is alive today is because she was smart enough and strong enough to see through your deception. 25 years to life. Federal and state charges. No possibility of parole for at least 15 years. David looked at me then. Finally. And I saw something in his face I hadn't expected. Not remorse. Not guilt. Anger. Like I'd somehow wronged him by surviving. By figuring it out. By refusing to die on his schedule. I looked right back at him. Didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Just held his gaze until he looked away. The insurance policy, the one he'd fraudulently taken out in my name, was voided, but the insurance company ended up paying out anyway. Not to David, obviously.
To me.
Under a special provision for victims of insurance fraud. That money, along with our joint assets, went toward covering my medical bills, legal fees, and restitution for the debt he'd accumulated in my name. 6 months after David's sentencing, I made a decision. I sold the house in Edison. Too many memories. Too many rooms where I'd been slowly poisoned by someone who promised to love me. I moved to a small coastal town in Maine, where the air is clean and the ocean is visible from my living room window. I went back to teaching, found a position at a small private school that was understanding about my condition. With proper treatment, and without anyone actively making me sicker, my lupus is manageable. I have bad days, sure, but I also have good days. Days where I wake up and watch the sunrise over the water and feel grateful to be alive. I volunteer twice a month at a support group for financial abuse survivors. Women and men who've been through what I went through, partners who stole from them, forged documents, destroyed their credit, threatened their lives. I share my story, show them it's possible to survive and rebuild. Sometimes people ask if I'm afraid David will get out someday, if I worry about revenge. The truth is, I don't think about him much anymore. He's where he belongs. And I'm here, living a life he tried to steal from me. Dr. Patel says my recovery has been remarkable. You're one of the lucky ones, she told me at my last checkup. Not everyone survives what you went through.
She's right.
I am lucky. But it wasn't just luck. It was noticing the small things that didn't add up and being brave enough to leave when staying might have been my end. Last week, I got a letter from Melissa. She's in therapy now, processing her role in everything, working through her own guilt and shame. She apologized. I wrote back, told her I didn't blame her, that we were both victims of the same man's manipulation, that healing takes time, but it's possible. Because that's the thing about surviving something like this. You don't just survive the crime. You survive the aftermath, the nightmares, the trust issues, the moments when you question everything about your judgment, your relationships, your ability to read people. But you also discover you're stronger than you thought, more resilient, capable of rebuilding from rubble. And every morning when I wake up in my little house by the ocean, take my medication, the real medication prescribed by doctors I trust, and watch the waves roll in, I remember that. Remember that David Cooper tried to erase me, tried to turn me into a tragedy, a cautionary tale, a line in an insurance claim. Instead, I'm here,
Alive.
teaching, healing, helping others heal. I survived. And that's the best revenge of all.